One minute she could be her normal self, while the next she could be wild. After a week, Anneliese returned to Klingenberg. She slept very little and was unable to eat. Eventually, when she could eat a little, she could not keep the food down. Around this time she became emaciated and her eyes were black and blue. She often injured herself. At times she was constrained to minimize her injuries. On May 28, 1976, after praying a rosary with her family, she mustered the strength to sign the papers for her thesis. On May 30th, a friend of Father Alt, Dr. Richard Roth, a physician from Klingenberg, came to witness one of the exorcism sessions. Dr. Roth had previously listened to some of the exorcism tapes and told Father Alt that listening to the tapes inspired him to pray again. Dr. Roth was curious to witness the events firsthand, and Father Alt was happy to have a doctor present, as Anneliese's physical condition had worsened. Upon seeing Anneliese, Dr. Roth explained, "My God, she has the stigmata." He also stated, "There is no injection against the devil." Father Alt came again for the session of June 8th. It was the last time he was to see Anneliese alive. In a letter to the bishop he described Anneliese's self-inflicted injuries and how she had bitten a hole in the wall and chipped her teeth. Father Renz continued with exorcism sessions until the end of June. Father Renz also reported to the bishop and described some of Anneliese's injuries and how she at times made countless genuflections. She was quite emaciated and ate or drank little. Anneliese had stated repeatedly that she would gladly eat if she was allowed to. Amidst the pain and terror, there were times when Anneliese spoke normally with Peter and her family. Peter stated that Anneliese was always absolutely clear in her decisions. The topics most frequently discussed were, should they seek medical help, and the hope that it would all be over in July. On June 27th, Anneliese had a fever of close to 40 degrees Celsius. This was brought down by cold compresses. Joseph called Father Alt, who suggested calling a doctor. When Roswitha asked Anneliese, she refused. The following day she neither ate nor drank. On June 30th, 1976, Father Renz, Joseph, Anna, Roswitha, Barbara, and Peter were present. Anneliese's temperature was again over 39 degrees. She suddenly begged, "Please, absolution." Father Renz immediately gave her absolution. Peter and Joseph held Anneliese, and Anna used a pillow to soften the effects of repeated genuflections that Anneliese insisted on making. Finally, when it was over, Peter and Father Renz said good night, while Anneliese asked her mother to stay. Her final words were, "Mama, please stay with me, I am afraid." At 8 a.m. the next morning, Anna called Joseph to tell him that Anneliese was dead. No one had ever imagined that the outcome on July 1st, 1976 could be as transpired. She was now free. Anna called Father Alt, who immediately called Dr. Roth. Dr. Roth estimated the time of death to be around 6 a.m. Since Dr. Roth did not have the proper papers for a death certificate, Dr. Keller was called. He did not issue a death certificate as he could not state that Anneliese's death was due to natural causes. A post-mortem showed that cause of death was due to starvation with physical exhaustion as a possible contributing factor. A criminal investigation began. The story received considerable attention by the media. Some came to visit Anneliese's grave and pray the rosary. On July 13, 1977, Father Renz, Father Alt, and Joseph and Anna were notified that they were going to be charged with negligent homicide for failing to seek medical assistance for Anneliese. The trial began on March 30, 1978 in Aschaffenburg. One newspaper stated that not since the Nuremberg trials had a story generated so much commentary. Public opinion was for the most part formed by a hostile media, which was not open to the possibility of possession, and did not have any idea of what the family, friends, and the two priests actually witnessed and experienced in this case. The court was to decide what caused Anneliese's death and who was responsible. The judge stated that citizens had violated the law, that it was neglect in the sense or under the law. The Michels did not testify. Father Alt, who was 40, gave most of the testimony, being the younger of the two priests. Father Alt stated that Anneliese viewed her sufferings as penance for priests and the German youth. Anneliese wanted the tapes made public so that people would realize that there was a devil and that the spiritual world did exist. If Anneliese's illness had been a physical one, he and Father Renz would have sought medical help. He spoke of the various demons whom they recognized by their different tones and expressions. Anneliese did not eat, due to the influence the demons had on her. Dr. Luthi testified that he had never suggested consulting the Jesuit, contrary to what the Michels witnessed. Dr. Roth, whom the defense felt would be of benefit to them, testified on 3 occasions. He never seemed to remember anything. Father Alt stated that Dr. Roth made several statements which were simply not true. Dr. Roth was investigated for perjuries, but no charges were laid. Father Renz presented excerpts of the exorcism tapes and explained how they came to believe that Anneliese suffered from possession, and that no one ever died as a result of an exorcism. Father Roderick testified that he was absolutely convinced that Anneliese was possessed, and that she was without a will while this state lasted, and that she was entirely normal when the state was not present. On behalf of the prosecution, Dr. Satis gave a summary of Anneliese's medical history. Satis stated that Dilantin successfully suppressed the seizures, resulting in the disease seeking another outlet, being a psychogenic psychosis. Satis saw in Anneliese a psychogenic posture, where she assumed the role of a person dominated by one or more demons. He also believed that Anneliese suffered from delusional ideas about being sinful and from hallucinations of the devil. This was common among religious people who suffered from depression, he said. The exorcism sessions confirmed her psychotic attitudes and made things worse. Up until April, the priest could have saved her by convincing her to eat, whereas by June it was too late. Satis stated that he would have tranquilized Anneliese, force-fed her, and treated her with electric shock. In her book, The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel, Dr. Felicitas Goodman points out various errors presented by Satis in his testimony. Her book is arguably the best on this story, as she had access to the priests, the court documents, and written testimony from several of the witnesses to the exorcism sessions. The 2 psychiatrists brought to the trial by the defense, in effect, supported Satis' evaluation of Anneliese by their testimony, much to the defense's disappointment. They believed that the 2 priests acted out of religious conviction, albeit from a naive and primitive perspective. The priests leaned towards a magico-mystical view, which was unusual for theologians of our time. They felt that Anneliese's demons were the expression of her naive piety. Her personality was determined by her epilepsy. This developed into a schizophrenic-like psychosis, or psychogenic psychosis, with depressive and delusional disturbances. The prosecution asked that the 4 be found guilty of negligent homicide due to their failure to act. They asked for fines for the priests and no punishment for the parents, as they had suffered enough. The defense demanded an acquittal, and as Anneliese had placed her life in God's hands, and it was her moral and constitutional right to refuse medical attention. The judges accepted the prosecution's medical testimony in its entirety. The epilepsy had evolved into a psychosis. In May, Anneliese was unable to determine what was in her best interests. The exorcisms aggravated her condition. The defendants should have sought medical help. All 4 were sentenced to 6 months in prison, which was suspended with 3 years probation. The 2 priests were fined, and the 4 incurred court costs. Later in a BBC interview, Anneliese's boyfriend Peter stated, "We were really hoping in her statement, on July 1st there will come a change. Of course, that things would happen as they did, we would never have imagined. This is the case when dealing with the new supernatural." From Anneliese's diary or spiritual notes, "You will pass all your tests, but you will be called upon to undergo tests of a different kind. I will give you my grace. You will be faithful till death."